Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Nancy Sockabasin with USEPA Region 9. I'm a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe, and I work in a water division on our tribal drinking water team. And we're going to present today. Let me share my screen real quick. Thanks for joining us for the infrastructure funding session for the drinking water and wastewater systems. Trying to advance my slide, 1 second. All right, before I start with the speakers, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm joining you virtually from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush and Muwekma Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Bay Area and the San Francisco Peninsula specifically. I want to honor the past, present, and future generations who have stewarded this land and recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to uphold the sacred relationship to their environment. Really want to thank you. And to get into our speakers today, we'll have 3 speakers. Unfortunately, Sarah Olson from HUD wasn't able to join us today, but her presentation is uploaded, and these other presentations will be uploaded as well. We will start today with Jeff Hayes from the USDA Rural Development, and then Louis Bernasconi will present from IHHS, and then I will present our funding programs for USEPA. All right, so I'm gonna start by, I'm no longer sharing my screen, Jeff, so why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and we will move into your presentation.
Can you see it?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Hayes. I am the Community Programs Director for USDA Rural Development here in Arizona, and also wearing the hat as the Acting State Director. So I'm address a little bit of all the programs today. And I want to welcome to and appreciate you guys sharing your time with us to explain our programs and hopefully give you guys a little incentive or idea, peek into our programming activities. So just do the next one. And if I get it to move forward here. Oh, sorry. All right, sorry. So just a quick overview. I want to talk about a little bit about the various different programs, because we're talking about water here, but when we look at it, we try to approach all of our programming from a more holistic approach. So when we're meeting with communities, we're actually addressing all the needs and trying to assess how, one, maybe they're interconnected, but 2, are there other things we can be doing to work concurrently with the projects, which we often see as housing, water, other infrastructure. So just a little quick overview of our programming we have that goes both tribal and non-tribal communities is our housing programs, which is we have our single-family housing program, which includes purchase of our homes, long-term financing for those. We also have a home repair grant program. We do multifamily housing program, and then we also doing a lot of workforce housing, which is a little more unique, where we're looking at supporting housing to support essential workers, which would be public safety, education, health and healthcare. So anything that workers that have trouble housing people in the communities that need support, that support essential services of the community, we can provide financing from that, from a different model. Of course, our infrastructure is what we're here to talk about today, which is our water, sewer, and broadband. But we also do community facilities, and each one has a little different population limit, but community facilities, it basically supports our loans and grants that support anything that supports the community again. So whether it's schools, hospitals, clinics, food banks, the spectrum is very broad, and it can be for any nonprofit or tribal or organization there. And then, of course, we tie into our business development, which is more planning, business development. Tourism is a major source of our programming and funding, industry, relending programs, and of course, local foods. And then last but not least is just our priority planning. We try to look at a planning so that we incorporate, whether it's any kind of multi-jurisdictional plan, whether it's multiple communities within a reservation or outside community or tribal, non-tribal relationships, so that we're looking at a more holistic approach to, again, community development, so that people have regional systems, or that we've, at least as our goal is within a region, we're planning and supporting the same ideals. So just real quick, just kind of a talk about our programming. We have our primary loans, which are direct and guaranteed loan programs, and our directors for those communities that are 10,000, and our guaranteed loans can actually go up to 50,000, and those are really geared more towards larger water systems like homeowner associations, private, semi-private public water systems that have the ability to go to commercial lending, and then we're guaranteeing 80% of that loan against any default. Our grants are there as well. They're great, but they're obviously, of course, limited. And we'll talk a little bit about, we do have a triple set aside here. Right now we have a regular grant program in Arizona itself. We typically get about $4 or $5 million in grant funds, but historically we actually end up accessing on an annual basis probably over $15-20 million in grant funds overall. So we're able to go into our tap into national pools to access funds for a variety of different projects. One of the programs is our Colonia. So whether it's tribal along the border, many tribes like Tohono O'odham and those in Southern California are also involved, are also designated as colonias. So we're able to tap into those funds. And we get about $3 million a year in that program, but historically we're tapping and accessing about $15 million a year on those funds from other states. So as Texas, New Mexico, and California don't necessarily use all their funds, they're pooled, and then we submit our projects up and access those projects. And also we have our tribal set aside specific to tribal programs. This can be added on as a layer to a program project, or it can be a smaller scale project where you fund it directly. And these are, of course, geared for projects that have health and safety issues and the communities are low income. But we also provide a lot of technical assistance for our circuit rider training and solid waste management programs. We're supporting both Rural Water Association, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, and then we have solid waste management and regular TAT grants for smaller groups. We do one in Arizona called Painted Desert Demonstration Projects, which is out of the Loop area, where we're doing smaller scale decentralized well systems, trying to come up with some innovative ways to provide water to rural areas that aren't ever going to be serviced by a conventional system. Our funding cycles, or of course we operate just like all federal agencies, are October to September. To be honest, the sweet spot of that is, of course, when Congress gets around to making budgets, we usually when we start releasing funds, but we always have a little bit of money to address cost overruns and emergency situations. But what we do is we accept applications all year round. We always try to promote early and often to get things moving forward. But our sweet spot for funding projects is generally from January to August, September. And so our goal is to keep those projects moving forward and access them throughout the year. And then if we have large scale projects, then we will access annual pooling. So this year, I'll talk about a little bit of that here next. So again, when we're focused today, it's mostly water and waste disposal loans and grants. Again, this is for funding clean and reliable drinking water systems, wastewater, storm drainage, which would be a loan only, but also for any household or business and community. So we look at all this community as a whole. One of the things we look is to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, is that we're take any commercial project and convert those into what we call an equivalent dwelling unit. And so that we're actually comparing communities based on those total number of equivalent dwelling units of usage. Most of them are usually residential projects, but often we have businesses or a laundromat or something that would use excess water. The applicants can, of course, be tribes, towns, cities. The others, what we call MPCs, that are municipal property corporations, and districts, and nonprofit organizations. And as I mentioned, federally recognized tribes. The project must be in an eligible area. Almost all tribal trust lands are eligible. Even if it's in a somewhat urbanized setting, they're still considered eligible. So for an example, one of the things we may do is that if there's a residential community that's tribal, that's located to adjacent community but needs decent water support or supply, we can actually connect an urbanized town or an ineligible community to a tribal or non-tribal community to provide water. So again, supporting that regionalized approach to water distribution. But also what we're finding, especially with the drought issues coming up, is that water supplies are getting more scarce. Smaller systems don't necessarily have the depth or capacity in their wells. And so we're looking at creating more of a regionalized system to back up a redundancy in their water supplies. Our interest rates, well, right now our interest rates are running about 1 3/8%. and we go up to 40 years for a water system. And then at that point, when we minimize the most amount of the debt that they can take on and spread it out as far as we can, then we will start looking at grant dollars. Just a general rule of thumb is what we're looking at is 1.5% of the median household income for that community as their approximate cost of water that they're going to operate. And there's always exceptions to that rule, and we see that with tribal communities especially. But essentially that kind of works out to most communities around $30 to $40 per user rate. We're looking at that, addressing those costs, which would include your O&M cost, your debt costs, and future costs, and making sure that you're set aside in proper reserves. We factor all that in before we start looking at then applying debt on top of that to hit that threshold. And then of course, trying to look at grants after that. If funds are available, grant, of course, I mentioned we try to layer the grant on to make the project sustainable. So once we've taken a project, maximize and assess that ability to take on debt and a comfortable threshold of affordability for the user rates, then we will be applying grant dollars onto that. Typically, we're maxed at 75% of the project cost, but the good thing is both with the colonias and the tribal set-asides, we can use as to augment it. So we can mix a regular grant on a tribal project and then use the tribal grant to overrun that threshold of 75% to again try to help to keep the project sustainable. And last things, we also have these search and pre-development planning grants. These have been a great tool we've been implementing over the last 3 or 4 years. These for $30,000 are small grants, pretty much over the counter that we can approve. And the idea of that is that we are using those to kickstart the preliminary engineering design report, give us the basic information about the system, what it needs, the cost, and then we're able to use make our commitment based on full-time funding commitment based on that project or that engineering report. So these are great things to use to get smaller systems or people that don't have the ability to front that cost. We're able to fund that. And as well as we work with other systems like Arizona, the WIFA and ADQ have similar systems we can work as well and match those funds up. So just kind of example, these are just some of the projects that we funded in the last year or so. Chinle Wastewater Plant, actually, that was a $12 million loan going into the project. At the end of the day, we ended up doing a total grant on that project based on feedback with our national office and discussing the economic distress in the area, the Navajo Nation with COVID, everything else. We actually submitted in at the time I'd prepared this for a $12.5 million loan, matched to another $12.5 that the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority had prepared. In conversations with it, the loan was set based on our statutory side of what we require, and politically they decided they would go ahead and reverse that into a grant. So that was a huge win for them. I mentioned Painted Desert, that's going to be coming in this year. We did some project wells with Pine Strawberry Tacna for a variety of different systems you can see. So, last year, our allocation, we spent about $17 million in loans, give or take, and an additional, now with the grant, about $17 million in grants. So, and again, $11.9 million just in Colonia funds itself. So we have a wide spectrum of pool of funds to choose from. We try to ask people, don't try to overthink the process. Let us find the resources for you. Let us focus on the system design and affordability, and then we will work with other agencies and ourselves to fine tune the best pots of money that would be there. So often we find people are looking at singular focus on a program, and it may not always be the best fit, and then they walk away and not knowing we have their other options. So some other purposes that we talk about just for funding, of course, we cover all the legal engineering fees related to a project, land acquisition, land rights, and water rights as well, and then permits and any equipment. In some cases, many that we've done this last few years of setting up new systems that have maybe private systems that have gone default or defunct, maybe, and where the owners abandoned it, and we're able to then essentially create a new organization, and we will provide some startup and maintenance to get the thing going in terms of staff time and operating costs. But also we can use to purchase a system. So we've done quite a few of those in Arizona, where a private system went out of business or went into receivership, or in some cases just sold it. And we've worked with nonprofits to buy those programs and then fund them. So when we do purchase a system, we do require some level of improvements to that. The assumption is of course, that the system's at a point that needs something, but it could be as simple as just adding water meters or maybe upgrading some line services. So again, we try to be very creative about this stuff. And all of it really usually starts with, I'll just stress this over and over again, it starts with a conversation or an email that says, what can we do and how do we start this process? And so we can have that discussion and put all their cards on the table and see what we can do to help shape the product. So I kind of brought this up, but again, specific to tribal set-asides, they actually fall under our 306C set-aside program. It's also similar to the Colonia. It's the same pool of money that's divided out. Again, cover same product as construction for basic water and waste disposal systems. All federally recognized tribes are eligible. Project must be in an eligible area, again, tribal land being eligible, and the applicants must meet the per capita and unemployment rights guidelines. So basically, we rarely run into that unless it's an urbanized setting that we're not able to fund a product that has, maybe it's a high income community. So planning to apply. So again, like I mentioned, simple thing is always to start with a conversation. We like to try to really meet all the players and partners, or if they're not, at least address who needs to be at the table eventually. It's a process. We like to get an idea of what the scope and the community's needs are, and then let's start working about what the issues of the system are. Is there compliance issues? Is it just simple upgrading because of growth? So we can really set the expectations of what's eligible for grant and what's going to fall under the loan side of the category. When to apply to funding, again, we encourage people to always start early and start as soon as possible, but also, again, work through that so we can set up the expectation and also maybe set up time frames so that there's a plan on what dates do we need to meet to be able to access funds, especially if it's a large scale project. An important feature as we're going into that, and that's why we start with that call, but is to make sure that you do get a DUNS number and set up a SAMS account. The DUNS number is really a registration ID that the entity would have, and the SAMS account is really basically becoming a government vendor, which allows us to then electronically transfer funds and track funds that we send to the organization. So I mentioned before, low-income projects are, we usually have up to that limit of 75%. That's not an automatic. We look at every project case by case and based on their case, their capacity. Some systems can take on larger debt. NTUA has larger scale projects and have a larger scale of users they can spread it on. And we have smaller tribal communities that just don't have that capacity, and often they're having to subsidize the rates. So we do look at that. But that tribal set aside as well as the colonial set aside allows us to overrun that 75% so that we can then add more grant dollars once we've reached those statutory limits. I mentioned earlier about projects becoming an evaluation of debt per EDU. Again, we're trying to neutralize and even out the list of number of homes versus commercial properties to come up with that equivalent dwelling unit or EDU. And again, we're looking at all these things of debt, operational costs, and reserves, as well as reserves for short-lived assets, which are those pumps and motors that last 5 to 10 years and then die. And we want to make sure that there's resources and funds set aside so that we're not having to go back each time to get more money. But by doing that, also that it increases your rates, which also then minimizes the amount of more debt you can take on, which then of course triggers over to, the reality is it triggers over to be able to have more grant eligibility as possible. So, I mentioned the 1.5% of the median household income. That basically is if you had a $20,000 income, you would divide that times that by 1.5%, and then divide that by 12, and that would be, in theory, the approximate amount of money that the user cost would be for that system and what we pay. Well, we do look at that, and just as a point of information, not to get too much into the weeds, but as we try to look at us also compare communities. So when we're assessing that one community's needs, maybe a smaller lower income community is larger to a next community, we're not going to compare those two systems to better their affordability. We look at another communities that are either tribal or non-tribal, but the size and scope and their median household income to compare rates so that we come up with what we call a similar system cost. And just in that process, it's not exact science, but it is a point of just trying to make sure that we are funding a product that's similar in size to other communities and keeping them in a reasonable rate structure that's typical for other communities. And whether it's tribal or non-tribal, usually we try to compare to tribal communities, but sometimes there's neighboring communities aside that we're able to do that as well. Another unique feature, which isn't necessarily on the tribal side, but it kind of falls in the same premises depending on the structure of the system. But Colonia funds do allow us to go onto private property to do services. So we're able to actually go on and hook up a community, take it off the septic system, and provide the service line to that house. That's unique. Many agencies aren't able to do that, but we're able to fund that, and that's usually always factored into, because we do want to abandon a septic tank away to eliminate the nitrate contamination, get that back and bring them on the sewer. Vice versa, if the homes not have potable water, we would extend the water line from the street, and then that service line goes to the house and hook them up. In some cases, we've done this with Tohono O'odham, where they actually put in, IHS put in a sewer line, but many of the homes never had bathrooms. So we've actually done a unique project in the last couple of years where we're actually doing modular bathrooms and putting them essentially a glorified outhouse, but basically they're ADA compliant. They have a little heat and maybe possibly air conditioning needed, and they're available to then have a full restroom outside of the envelope of the house, just because the structure couldn't support it. And so those again have been funded by Colonia funds, but we're actually on tribal property. And again, we can mix the funds, and we can match with other agencies, EPA, IHS. So there's always ability to do that, to extend the dollars and share the process. So the approval process, again, I keep repeating this, but it's a simple thing. Start with a conversation. The next is to get that preliminary engineering report and environmental assessment done. That's why we have that search grant available. If not, that can be a community share. Those things are also always reimbursable if the community's been able to front it. We do the underwriting, as I mentioned, based on the demographics community, the EDU rates. What we do is a little bit somewhat unique, is that we will commit our funding on that preliminary engineering report. It's locked in. If there's a loan, the interest rates are fixed. So you're guaranteed that money. So then you know that you can go to design level and work to get those funds, or get that project designed. And everybody knows that once it goes to construction, our money's there to do the construction side of it. We do, some cases with larger project, depending on the level of the loan amounts, we do require some bridge financing to cover the cost of that design. We have resources to cover that as well. We do a design bid build project, so we do not do design bid projects. So we're going out and working through that whole process, and our engineers also heavily involved in that to make sure that the product is not any too many bells and whistles that would be inefficient, cost effective. And then basically the back end, we close our loan on the takeout. Smaller projects, especially with the large grant dollars, then we're actually just funding the construction directly from our resources. And that really is sort of in a nutshell. My information's here. If you have questions, my phone numbers are there. This is my cell phone, so it goes directly to me, and my email. And happy to answer any questions if you want to stop for that.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a couple of questions. There were a couple in the chat, but then we should get moving because we do have two other presenters. The first question was, when you're funding water systems, do they have to be public water systems?
Not necessarily. It could be a nonprofit. It depends on the community. So we've done co-ops, nonprofits, but we can't do a privately owned system. So if it's a private for-profit system, we would not be eligible. That really is a commercial enterprise and wouldn't function that way. But we can do a nonprofit. Sometimes it's just a collective group of homeowners that share a well. We would then have them form a nonprofit and set it up and do that. And that would all be part of the process we work with. So there's never an exclusion unless somebody's just trying to do as that private enterprise. So pretty much we can work with that. I'm looking at the other minimum requirements for infrastructure. Does there have to be significant deficiencies? Well, no, there doesn't. The deficiencies, that's more interpretive. Obviously, some cases they're actually straight up violations of health and water quality standards. That obviously always gets our attention as a priority. But sometimes there are other system flaws that are not, but still might be eligible. For example, I'll just mention a project we had Pine Water Strawberry. They had inherited an older system that was bubble gum and band-aided together. Basically, it was actually using sewer pipe connected to water pipe to other things that have been built and put together over the years, which caused many problems and leaks. Well, was it really a water quality or health system? No, but the system itself was inadequate, and it was causing leaks and deficiencies, which also possibly led to contamination. So those would be things interpreted as water quality or a health supply. So there's a variety of things like that. We always try to take a very reasonable approach to all that to ensure that but doesn't always have to be it. But when we talk about grant dollars, we were typically looking at always addressing a future or need impending health and water quality standard there. The next one is, does grant help getting wells to use county water now that we have water rights, but we need wells? Yeah, the wells would be included. Obviously, it has to do an environmental report, but yes, that would be a possibility to address that, and we will fund those. There's always, of course, we're looking to make sure that the hydraulics are there, because and hydrology reports are as strong as possible, so we don't put money out to that and then find out that the well goes wrong. But that happens. It's happened a couple times in this last year, where we spent a couple $100,000 on a well and found out it just put out 7 gallons a minute, and not that great of water to get that too. So those are all eligible costs. Again, that's why we look at that search grants or these preliminary engineering reports to provide that reports as much as possible, the best educated guess, and that would all be included in that. And then as we're closing those, getting those funds done, once some of the work on testing might be done on the preliminary side. Some of it might be other resources, maybe EPA or IHS might be able to have some resources to do that. Again, we would look at that whole approach to see what's the best source to get the most accurate reflection on that. And yes, the grants. So if they're aged, there's a point of water safety. If you have an aged system, it's antiquated. Maybe there's high volume of leakages. Assumption would be is that leaks can lead to contamination, especially if there's low water pressure. So we look at that. I mean, we try to look at that as a very, I would say, we're liberal, but an optimistic approach to how that would be done, because of probably the water lines are agents, all the other system parts are too. And the collective part of maybe the overall system needs to be addressed, and we would look at that from that angle. So, again, rarely, the only times we really don't do something is new development and just over expansion of a community, oversizing the project for future growth. We would not do that. Those would not be grant eligible. But if a system's going to do that, and often we have that with a city who wants to upsize a water system to another project, to a larger commercial enterprise, they can participate in the project, right? So maybe they pay for the upsized pipe and look at the cost differential and pay that cost. We're happy to see that go along because it's part of the infrastructure development for the community. We're just not going to subsidize it.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And
Sure.
I think it's really great to have other agencies presenting with us, because I think some of these questions are coming from people who know the EPA programs very well, and there are things that we can't fund or may rank lower on our priority list. So it's great to hear that other agencies can fund them. And it also shows just how we leverage funds. The projects that you mentioned at Navajo and Tohono O'odham, we've put funding into those projects as well.
Right.
And when you have a really large project, it's great when you can have many different agencies contributing to that project. Yeah.
And often what we do is just sort of segregate it. Sometimes for simplicity, maybe one agency funds one part of the project and the other group funds something else, so that maybe sometimes there's some complexities in blending monies, but there are always ways to make things happen, and the leverages are always great on that. And we again really encourage it anytime we can do that. And we try to reach out, and collectively, generally, we are meeting to discuss those on the side. So
great. Thank you, Jeff. Feel free to reach out to Jeff if you have questions about his funding. We're going to move on to Lewis next, and we're going to save EPA for last because I feel like you guys hear from us a lot. And so if we need to, I can, kind of smush down my presentation a little bit, but we're going to give Lewis his time and have him present about the IHS.
So sorry if I went over long there.
No, it's okay. It's perfectly fine. We're good. All right, go ahead, Lewis.
All right, thank you for having me. Do I need to share my screen? Is that how we're doing this?
Yes, if you could share your screen, that would be great.
All right. All right.
Good.
So good morning, and thanks again for allowing IHS to come onto this meeting. My name is Louis Bernasconi. I'm the district engineer out of the Reno district office in the Phoenix area, IHS. I oversee the sanitation facility construction program this district. And today I'm going to be talking about our funding availability and our deficiency system, mainly on how we can actually fund the projects and IHS's role. I'm going to kind of jump through a little bit quicker, leave some time for questions. So first of all, we have the authority to actually do this work based on a law that was passed in 1959. We did a project in 1958. I'll show you a picture of that real fast in a minute. That kind of prompted this necessary role of the federal government to provide sanitation facility to Native American communities. That role was kind of expanded in 1988 to actually develop a sanitation deficiency system where we identify all the deficiencies on the water systems and sewer systems and solid waste facilities. So our role as IHS engineers is to maintain that deficiency system and maintain an inventory. So every year we use this system to share with Congress. We provide environmental and civil engineering. That's not on the slide there, civil engineering and assistance. Most of the time, we're all civil engineers acting in the role of environmental engineers with putting pipes in the ground as kind of our main focus. We meet with tribes to develop projects. So they'll identify a problem, say there's low pressure. We'll go out and take all the on-site information and help them develop that actual project as engineers. And then we'll figure out how to pay for it. So we'll work with USDA, we'll work with EPA, we'll work with ourselves with our own funding. We'll try to figure out the best approach to kind of find the funding needed to solve the biggest problem. And then on top of that, we'll go ahead and do the actual engineering design, put together construction packages if we're doing tribal procurement, one way of paying for the construction process, and then provide construction management services and help build up the tribe, back up the tribe, and help make sure that they're meeting all the rules and regulations with the funding. On top of the actual construction themselves, we also advocate for the tribe. So when they have troubles with EPA or troubles with any kind of other agencies or any kind of really anything related to public health, we could kind of dip our toes in and figure out where we can help out and maybe get them in contact with people that could help them out better. And that's kind of where we're leaning more on our O&M side. So we have utility consultants in most of our offices, and they provide more of that hands-on operator technical assistance. We're also reaching out more with the RCAC, Nevada Rural Water, Cal Rural Water, and Arizona ITCA. So we have all these relationships. We try to make sure we can figure out where we can actually solve problems with. And then we have a little bit of emergency response role. This is pretty minor. Occasionally, if there's some kind of emergency, back in 2017, there was a pretty major flood event at one of the tribes we work with. And we were able to help them get water back online and properly disinfected, and helping them with all the boil water notices and all that kind of stuff. And that lasted about a week and a half. So kind of a minor role. Nationwide, we have 12 areas. Out of Reno here, we're in the Phoenix area. But we also serve the whole state of Nevada, Utah, and most of Arizona outside of Tucson and Navajo. On top of that, we serve the whole Eastern Sierra, as far south as Lone Pine, if you're familiar with the area. And then as far east as Death Valley, we serve the Timbishaw tribe out there. So we have a very large area. So like I said before, in 1958, there was a very sanitation facility construction project in Elko, Nevada. And that prompted the passage of the 86-121 in 1959, which gave us the authority to build those memorandum of agreements with the tribes. So every project we fund, we have an MOA with the tribe specifically for that one project. So what kind of projects are we talking about? We're talking about large water mains out in Arizona. You see the top right there is Hopi Reservation. We have sewer main going in there in Bemidji area, and along with a lagoon site out there. So we kind of fund everything, there and in between, as small as individual sites and as big as, big community systems. On top of that, we serve solid waste facilities. We've funded transfer stations in the past and provided engineering design for that. So we have four main types of funding. That's kind of changed in 2020 and 2021. So our four main ones are housing funds, regular funds. We occasionally get special projects funds, which are approved by the director level at IHS headquarters in Rockville, Maryland. Same thing with emergency funds. So we get a very small amount of emergency funds every year. I think it's about $1 to $2 million nationwide. But same thing, the SOC director at the headquarters level will be approving that. In 2020, we received about $10 million nationwide from the CARES Act funding. And then in 2021, we received the ARPA funding, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So our two main bread and butter funds are housing funds and regular funds. So housing funds, we're able to serve individual homes as long as we're able to build that relationship with the local tribe. So new or like new homes. What I kind of look for with new or like new homes is a home that someone's gonna be living in for at least 15 years. 10 to 15 years. So that's where we're serving individuals. We'll work with tribes, though, to get those served. We have that government-to-government relationship still. And then regular funds, we fund existing homes, and we fund those projects through the SDS system, the sanitation deficiency system. And we'll kind of dive in more on those here in a minute. So like I was saying, housing funds, our main priorities are BIA HIP. We're able to pay for those. If they're HUD funded, then HUD's expected to be paying for those. Pretty much everything else, privately financed, anything on that end. Even HUD-backed loans, so the 184 program, we're able to support those as well. So new homes and BIA HIP homes. We try to serve. So what that actually means is actually drilling a well if they need a well, connecting them to an existing water system, connecting them to an existing sewer system or a septic system. So what we'll do is after we receive an application for service, we'll go out and do a site evaluation, and then we'll find the funds to actually put towards that. We do have cost caps on that. In Phoenix area, our cost cap currently is $40,000 for water and sewer. There are some eligibilities to go a little bit higher, but not much higher. We try to serve, if we're serving just water or sewer, just one or the other, we can go up to about $27,000 there. If you need more information too, don't hesitate to ever reach out to your local office. So IHS regular funds are based on documented need. So the biggest piece of SDS is documentation. In the past, I would say that IHS didn't do a great job of documenting needed projects. But so we're trying to do a much better job of this documentation piece and collaborating more with tribes. So SDS is that database. It's an online system. I believe that we can give access to tribal leadership, and EPA also funds projects off of this system. It's the primary way that we fund projects, and it's the primary way that EPA Clean Water Indian Set-Aside funds their projects. So how much money are we talking about here? So Division Sanitation Facilities construction, nationally, these are all national numbers. So in the SDS system in 2020, we had a need of $2.5 billion. That went up to $3.1 billion in 2021. So our engineers are doing a good job of finding more deficiencies. I'm sure that the need is probably larger than that. But with staffing and time and projects and construction, there's always an ability to do better. So what you'll see here too is a feasible need. So a feasible need is our projects that are actually within our funding cost caps. So where that's also increasing, went up about $100 million. So that's good to see. So how much money did we actually get? So both in 2019 and 2020, we received an appropriation from Congress of $192 million. One of the big contrasts was from 19 to 20 was outside funds. I think a big piece of 2020 was covered by other agencies. So EPA, USDA, Rural Development, Bureau of Reclamation. Those are kind of our big three that we work with and partner with nationwide. We are seeing increases in projects funded. We're seeing increases of homes served, and we're seeing increases of projects completed. So I think as whole, I think we're improving. Of course, with more money, we see project duration always increasing because more money doesn't always equal more staff to actually get the work done. And 2021 numbers, we don't have those until the end of the year. So the final report for that's going to come out here in December. But we do know for ARPA funding, we received 167 million. So it just about doubled our budget of 192 million. So that added additional challenges in providing all the reporting that we had to do. So you'll see here in Phoenix area, we received about 10 million in 2020, and then we saw a reduction to 7.6 million. However, with our ARPA allotment, we went to almost 20 million total for the year. So it just kind of provides a summary there. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead as we got about 6 more minutes. So every year we try to get our SDS submitted by August 1st. We try to work with tribes year round to develop the documentation needed to actually get projects funded. We like to fund water, sewer, solid waste infrastructure. Since time constraints, I'm going to just keep on jumping ahead here. We like to make sure that there's an actual health need and deficiency. So we score our projects within the SDS on these 8 criteria. Health impact and deficiency level have the most power, most weight to them, along with the O&M capability and capital costs. So this is actually an old slide. Our capital cost scores now are out of 0 to 9 or -9 to +9. So that's helped out a lot of the smaller tribes, I think, in getting projects funded. And the O&M capability actually is up to 16 now. So that's where we kind of focus on working with the tribes on building that O&M capability. It's an easy way to increase the scores of fundable construction projects. And like I said, more information. Hopefully, if you are in tribal leadership, you guys are meeting with an IHS engineer yearly to discuss the SDS system and provide documentation of projects. In 2019, we had a change in our system. So pretty much every one of our projects that we fund now has to have a PER or a PER equivalent as approved by the SFC director of that area. So what we kind of look to see is if it has a PER, we'd expect it to be fundable within 10%. If it's kind of lightly assessed, but maybe could get to a PER, 25%, but we can't fund it yet. And then tier 3 is just keeping that inventory on the system so to make sure. I'm not sure if I mentioned this. The SDS, it gets reported to Congress annually. It usually takes a snapshot November 1st and then gets reported to Congress in December before the new budget comes out. So the key is documentation. If there's ever any kind of issues, shoot your local IHS engineer an email and document when it happened. Get photos of what it actually is. If it's a main break and it's old pipe and it's kind of a weird OD, get that OD and report that back. As much documentation as possible allows us to get these projects funded a lot easier. And then it also gets us out there and gets a better design, really, at the end of the day. So as I've been saying, get out there as much as you can. This is a nice old photo from the Grand Canyon, the IHS engineer. I noticed there's an air on this. So if you're in the Phoenix area, that one's right. California is just /California, Tucson/Tucson, Navajo/Navajo. All of our guidance documents that kind of describe how we're allowed to do our job are provided here. So DSFC/resources. And with that, I kind of ran through it just to provide some time for questions if you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Lewis. And I was just told at the top of the hour, so it gives us a little extra 10 minutes and we'll go right to that time. And we do have one question for you that came in, and actually it's a question for IHS and USDA. Do you expect to potentially get a lot more funds from the bipartisan hard infrastructure bill when it is passed?
Yeah, so no, on our end, we're planning on that at a headquarters level. They told the directors at area level, and this is probably more information than I should probably know. But there's been discussions of potentially funding a large portion of the SDS with this infrastructure bill. The one area I could see though is if we don't have these projects well documented, are we still going to fund them and maybe add additional funds for contingency or something like that? But there has been talk about a lot more funding, and we're trying to do our best at the field level to make sure that we have those deficiencies appropriately documented in the system. so that when and if money comes, we can get those projects funded and serve the tribes.
Great, thank you, Louis. And Jeff, did you want to answer that question too? Oh, Jeff, I think we can't hear you. We're still not able to hear you, Jeff. Sorry. Maybe you can type something in the chat if you're comfortable with that, and we can move on to the EPA presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for more questions, I believe. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Louis, can you stop sharing your? Okay, great. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. So some of this information you guys have seen if you've gone to some of the water sessions earlier in the week, and we'll talk a little bit more about the infrastructure programs this afternoon at our 2 o'clock session as well. So just to give you a brief overview, our funding for the drinking water set aside comes from the Drinking Water SRF. We get a national allocation for all projects and programs, and 2% of that is given to tribes for the national tribal set aside. And that started as a 1.5%, and it's been increased over the years and increased to 2% in 2010. And in 2016, we also added a funding floor, and for drinking water, that's $20 million. So if the 2% allocation is less than 20 million, tribes will still receive the $20 million. And in Region 9, you'll see that we received about 7.1 million this year in FY21 for tribes. This is just a snapshot of what we've received for funding, and you can see in the previous 3 years, or the most recent 3 years, that's been pretty consistent funding. For what types of projects we fund installation and upgrade of treatment facilities. We can install new transmission lines to provide access, and we can replace critical infrastructure if the replacement is needed to maintain compliance or further the health protection goals of the Safe Drinking Water Act. We can also fund expansion and consolidation in some limited circumstances, and we can develop planning documents such as preliminary engineering reports for projects. We often will phase a project and do all of the planning first, and make sure those planning documents are done, make sure all right-of-ways have been established before we'll fund the construction of a project. Things we can't fund. We can't fund compliance monitoring, so any monitoring that you're required to do under the Safe Drinking Water Act, we don't fund that type of activity. And we also don't fund operation and maintenance. And I know this is something we talk about quite a bit because it is a huge need in Indian country, but it's not something that we are able to do at this point in time. And we also can't plan for future growth. We're focused mostly on the existing infrastructure deficiencies at this point in time. Additionally, we can't fund projects that are primarily needed for fire protection or projects that are mainly serving commercial operations. I will note, though, that if there are components of your project that include fire protection or commercial operations, we may ask for a contribution. But if the primary purpose is for either of those, we won't be able to fund the project. So we fund tribal communities, public water systems that are serving a tribal community. And the system, we make sure that the system has a certified operator. That's required prior to the award. And we generally don't fund systems that are in significant non-compliance unless the project is going to bring them into compliance with EPA requirements. We fund using a health ranking priorities. Many regions use the SDS list to fund their drinking water projects. Region 9 has chosen to go a different direction because we were hearing from tribes that we weren't getting to the projects that were the highest health risks. As Louis mentioned, the SDS ranking does include health category, but it's not the only thing that they consider. And so we've revised the way that we fund projects, and we have now a priority system based on the health categories. In addition, we also will fund projects that have a water supply issue. So if they're serving fewer than 30 gallons per capita per day, we'll fund that. And this year, we've talked a little bit about this potential infrastructure bill that is making its way through. We're anticipating that we'll get an additional funding bump this year. That's uncertain at this time, but we are encouraging projects of all sorts that will be to be submitted. And things that might have ranked lower before, we have a ranking criteria that are 1 through 9. This year, we were actually able to fund some projects in the 9B category. And so we're anticipating we can get down the list to those projects this year as well, and maybe even further if we have additional money. So we're requesting projects that might be addressing emerging contaminants like PFAS, or projects that are addressing contamination that are approaching an MCL. They may not be at the MCL right now. These projects rank lower on the list, but we think we can get to some of these projects this year. Iron and manganese removal projects, and replacement of aging water tanks that aren't yet significant deficiencies, but may be moving in that direction. So keep that in mind. The funding that we have, we've really done a great job of getting to the projects that have the highest health needs. And so we are moving further down that list, and we anticipate getting further even this year. I mentioned the 30 gallons per person per day. In addition, we can also require a funding contribution if your system is consuming over 150 gallons per capita per day. These are our trying to incentivize water usage, to lessen water usage. And in addition, other projects that you might want to consider this year are just water efficiency projects. If you want to install meters, that's something we can fund, or improved controls for your system. And then implementation of backup water sources or storage are also something we would consider for funding. And these are all things we've considered in the past. They've just ranked lower, and we're hoping to get to those types of projects this year. We are also more recently funding training and certification projects. And then to get to our solicitation for this year, we have currently, the solicitation is out. This is a website for that. The proposals are due November 19th, and this isn't a full application at this point in time. You don't have to go into grants.gov with anything. Right now, we just need basically a 2-page proposal form that is on our website and an endorsement from the tribal leadership. So those are the main things. Some projects will require additional information. If you've planned your project and you want to fund construction, we'll need to see that documentation, but it's a simplified process, and the full application process will come later. For the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside projects, again, we're funded at 2%. We have a funding floor of $30 million for wastewater projects. And this year in Region 9, the total allocated was for about $12 million. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that was allocated to the region. Again, funding across the region and across the nation has been about the same the past few years. So eligibility, all federally recognized tribes are eligible. The funds can be used for planning, design, and construction of wastewater treatment facilities. And we provide the funding for projects that are ranked high on the IHS SDS list. And we work very closely with IHS in looking at those projects on SDS to fund those projects that are high, ranked high. Projects that are eligible, project planning, design, and preparation of a PER, infrastructure construction, and major rehab. And we also do on-site wastewater treatment systems, septic systems for individual homes. Things we can't fund, again, operation and maintenance, repairs to treatment systems in emergency situation, and that's mostly due to the funding process that we have and the cycle that we follow for that. And we also can't do indoor residential plumbing. And just a little note about how we fund projects. The agency is given 2% of the total allocation for SRF. And then IHS, they prepare their list of deficiencies that are technically and environmentally feasible. And just a note, Lewis mentioned earlier that they have a cap on how much they can put into a certain project depending on the cost per home. And EPA can partner with IHS for those projects. So if IHS can only pay for a certain amount and they have a capped amount, EPA can contribute to that project as well. And we may be able to fund that entire project. And then the funding is designated for each IHS area based on the total percentage of wastewater needs in SDS. And so Region 9 receives an allocation for Phoenix, the Navajo area, Tucson area, and California as well. And this is basically just saying we select projects directly off SDS. We also have a transfer authority, and that's something that we do internal, but we are basically able to transfer some funding from clean water to drinking water. Up to 33% of the drinking water allocation can be transferred. If we have a lot of high priority projects in one program or another, we can do that within the region. And these are the IHS contacts. These will be included in the presentation. And we also have the EPA contacts. IHS contacts are important for the clean water Indian set aside because your projects do have to be on SDS. And for the drinking water projects, reach out to your program manager to talk about any projects you're interested in funding this year in preparation to submit those to us in November. Okay, I think that's it for my presentation. I know that was kind of quick. Did any questions come in for either USDA, IHS, or EPA? So Jeff, do you expect the creation of new programs within USDA with these funds?
Oh, we can't hear you again, Nancy.
Right. We had a question for Jeff. Let's see. Jeff, do you expect the creation of new programs within USDA with these funds? I'm not sure if we can hear Jeff now.
No, can't
No,
unmute.
I don't think we can. All right. And we are rated 11, but maybe, Lewis, if you can answer John Flores' other question, can any of your funds be used to pay for connection to a municipal water district?
Yeah, so we are allowed. That's an eligible expense. What we look to do, though, is also not pay for the actual connection fee. I don't think so. I think that would fall under O&M. But we can, if your guys are connected to like a municipal sewer system and they have to do upgrades, say you guys built an additional 200 homes and there's an additional wastewater flow to that wastewater facility, we could assist in funding the construction for that new wastewater facility for if they have an expansion. For actual connection fees, that would be considered probably O&M, and we wouldn't be able to fund that.
Great, thank you. And Jeff answered a question. Yes, for USDA, we can pay for capacity in the system. So, okay, and I think we're right at 11, and I know others need to get to other sessions, so I appreciate everyone attending. I'm sorry that it was a little bit rushed at the end. If you have questions, please reach out to any of us from the federal agencies for the drinking water set-aside projects. Reach out to me or your program manager if you want to talk more about projects to submit due November 19th of this year. So thanks, everyone, and we will hopefully see you soon in person.
Yeah, thanks.